Hello everyone, welcome along to our latest UX Bytes webinar. I'm joined by my colleague Charlotte here today, and today's topic is all things usability testing. We've chosen this topic because it's quite practical. It's quite a common methodology used within the UX design process, and importantly, it's really about a quick overview because it's such a broad and deep topic that 30 minutes doesn't really do it justice in terms of how far you can go. We know a number of training providers would offer full day courses or a couple of day courses in this, but we're hopeful that today's webinar is still really useful for you to get a really good overview in terms of the context of usability testing in the design process. So just before we get into it, just a bit of housekeeping and introductions. So I'm Andrew McCrea. I am head of delivery at Fathom. My role is basically to ensure that our quality of our processes and our outputs and the support of the delivery team is managed for the benefit of Fathom and our clients, of course. And I'm joined today by my colleague Charlotte.
Hi folks, so as Andrew said, my name is Charlotte. I'm a UX analyst at Fathom, and I'm part of the research team. So I work really closely with our clients and also our designers to ensure that those user needs are always there within any sort of product or service that we design. So really looking forward to talking about one of the methodologies that we use on a probably daily basis here at Fathom.
Thanks, Charlotte. So just before getting into the content, just to let you know what the running order and what we're going to cover today. So I'm just going to start with a basic overview of what usability testing is, and as well what it isn't, so that we're very clear about what its purpose is. I want to take a minute as well then just to describe where it fits in the design process, the typical product design process, and the role that usability testing can play throughout that cycle. Charlotte is then going to take us through some methods that can be used across different formats of usability testing. Teach us all about the process in terms of right from the beginning at planning stage through to reporting or providing recommendations. And then we've got some tips on how to get started, because we're imagining today there's maybe some people who are new to this or quite new to it, or just starting out on a journey to maybe learn about it. And we want to give some practical tips on how to get started as well. And then we'll finish with our usual up to 15 minutes of Q&A, where we can answer any questions that you've thought of either before or during this webinar. And on that point, would encourage you to, as we're running through this, if any questions come to mind, please use the Q&A window that you have there on Zoom, just to fire in any questions. And there's no such thing as a bad question when it comes to this stuff, so please feel free to pop them in. So just to get started with our overview, so we want to cover what usability testing is, importantly what it isn't as well, and why it matters, why it's an important element of any product design process. So this diagram here you see in front of you is a research landscape. In 2014, a guy called Christian Rover, who used to work for Yahoo and eBay and McAfee, just to name a few, put together a really nice model that is now used across most product design teams to think about what type of research do we need to undertake, or what combinations of research do we need to undertake to understand users across different levels and across different perspectives. So if we look at the axis, we have qualitative and quantitative on the x-axis, and then we have observational at the top and attitudinal at the bottom. And what we're trying to say here is that, or what Christian Rower is trying to say is that there's a number of research methods that try and get into different perspectives and how we need to understand people and users and humans. Usability testing then, as you can see, is in that top left quadrant. So it's in the qualitative and observational zone. And what that essentially means is that's the zone where we can understand what people do, and we can understand feelings, thoughts, and emotions behind what they do as well. So we're getting an insight into their what's in their heart and what's in their head when they're using a product or service. And that's typically where usability testing sits. But if we look at the next slide, we can see just the model represented on a much simpler way without all the different research methods in there. And we can see that usability testing still sits in that top left quadrant. So that's where we understand what people do, and we get a sense of why they do it as well, because we're getting time with people, we're seeing what they do, but we're also hearing and we're getting a sense of their feedback and getting their emotions. And that's why it's a really important fundamental process within the design process, because until you understand the why, it's very hard then to really tap into user needs at an emotive level, or a level where it's actually influencing their behavior. And you'll notice there we've put typically in there, because usability testing isn't always qualitative. And what we mean by that is, of course, the going about the research is typically qualitative, because you're spending time with people and you're understanding emotions and thoughts and behaviors. But it can also be quantitative, and Charlotte will explain a little bit more about that in future slides. But it can be quantitative because it can be measured, and if you do enough usability tests, of course, that measurability of performance combined with volume makes it also fit into sometimes the quantitative area as well. So just moving on then, I thought it would be nice to start off by just describing what usability testing isn't. These are just a few examples of many, but just in the interest of time, we've kept this to 4 main ones that often spring to mind in our processes. So usability testing isn't user acceptance testing. So some people or some projects or some teams might actually think, okay, well, if we as a team invest time in testing a product to see if it is going to meet the needs and expectations of the users we are designing this for, that is a method of self-reporting and self-testing, which isn't usability testing. That's you validating your own assumptions and making sure that it works from your perspective. It also isn't QA, which is quite similar to UA, but UAT, sorry, but it's not QA where, again, internal teams try and spot bugs and fix things. That's a self ethnographic method to kind of improve quality of a product from the perspective of the product design team. So it's not QA. It's also not validation. So usability testing, when you get out the far side of it, might by proxy actually validate your design, because if it goes well, you might actually say, oh, okay, that validated our hypotheses, our design works, but it shouldn't be the intent of your testing. You know, you don't test to pat yourself in the back, you test to find problems to fix. And it's always important to bring yourself back to that stance of humility and saying, look, we know this could be better. Let's test it to find problems rather than let's test it to validate our decisions. And then finally, it shouldn't be used to test abstract ideas. So what we mean by that is it should be used to test ideas and concepts or performance elements of your design. So it shouldn't be used to test what will people think of the new brand, or I wonder how people will like how our use of images. It needs to go more functional, and it needs to be more task-based than that. So it needs to be around conversion and journeys and how people reach content or how people complete goals, rather than more high-level abstract ideas. So that brings us into what usability testing is. And again, we've kept this succinct, although we could go on in terms of what it is and what it represents. One of the first things that it is it's design and it's user-led. So this is kind of like the opposite of what we talked about in the first slide there, around internal teams making decisions and then testing it themselves. You know, it's usability testing is always performed by end users or people that represent end users, and most product teams, as we've said, spend a lot of time deciding that it's going to work for themselves, but this gives a voice to the outside world, the users that are going to be using the product. The next thing that it is it's convincing. So of all the research methods that we get the chance to play around with and fine tune as regard of our projects, we find that it's probably the most convincing method when we're trying to influence stakeholders and third parties, or our own teams even who are designing, because there's nothing more humbling than seeing users struggle and find problems that you as a designer or part of a team can't see yourselves. And that's the whole crux. If you boil UX right down, that's the whole crux of it. What will users think and do with your products? And that's usability testing gets right at the heart of that. Another thing that it is it's data driven. So usability testing is data driven because when you perform usability testing, you need to have it structured in a way where you have the same or similar people completing the same tasks on the same devices with the same context. And that means that by aggregating what people do across those criteria, it becomes a data set that can be used to measure performance. So importantly, usability testing shouldn't be random in terms of random people, random tasks, random devices, for example. It should be very structured around what you're trying to test with who, on what device, and in what context, and then you can build a data set from that. And then the last point we've got here is it's cost effective too. So a lot of people who we've dealt with for the first time, maybe at Fathom, maybe perceive it being more expensive than it actually is. But we know, because we run it and we talk to teams that also do it themselves, that in a few days, with not a lot of third-party resources in terms of software or tools, you can get a really solid bank of usability tests done. And in terms of a research method, in terms of what quality output you get for the investment in, we think it's really good. It's really good value. It's really good bang for your buck in terms of what output you get off the back of usability testing typically. And why does it matter? So really, it boils down to something I've talked about already a little bit in the first couple of slides. Is as you can see from this next comic strip from Dilbert, what's good about this is not by just speaking to people or using people to test design. That isn't the answer, because here it's internal people that is representative of the audience that has been tested. And Dilbert here humbly is going to his bosses and saying, look, we should have talked to people outside this building, because, albeit, yes, idiots is not what product design teams are. Typically, they are usually smarter than users, and that's the problem, because you need to actually, you need to boil it back, bring it right back to you, not the user. And we have, if you're privy to some of our earlier webinars, we hit home on that a couple of times already in terms of the importance of taking yourself away as a product design team from the product and thinking, right, we typically know technology more. We certainly know our product more than users do, and bringing it back to users typically are less proficient and aren't as familiar with what we are familiar with. Okay, so just another small bit from me before I hand over to Charlotte. Just want to talk a little bit about where it can fit in the design process overall. So this slide here represents, firstly, what you see in terms of the pink area. That is an adaptation of the double diamond made famous by the Design Council, British Design Council, back in around 2005. And it's been used and adapted across a whole series of design professions. Anything in terms of design thinking, human-centered design, service design, customer experience, and of course UX design as well. And what we're trying to say here is that usability testing has a home and a role to play at basically any part in the design process. So if we take the left-hand side of the diamond, that is what's typically referred to as the problem space. That is where energy is invested with users and your internal teams to discover and define what problem or problems exist that we need to overcome with design. And it's cyclical as well. It's not just a straight line, of course, and that's what those arrows represent. But usability testing can play a part here. So very often people think that usability testing comes further in the design lifecycle towards when you're building something. But usability tests can be a really good way to build up initial hypotheses and ideas that can be utilized later in the design process. So in the first arrow there, typically what you can do with usability testing is if you've got an existing product, you can usability test it straight up to work out, okay, what do we believe is wrong right now on top of other research data that we might have. We can look at our competitors' products and usability test them alongside our own, and we can get some real good insight there. And we can also test comparative organizations. So one that isn't necessarily right in your customer base, but maybe if it's professional services or retail, you can look at their usability, look at their website, test it with real users, and get some ideas in terms of what works or what doesn't work, so that you don't replicate mistakes and you can utilize areas that perform well maybe later on in your design process. Then the right-hand diamond represents the solution space, and that's where ideation, prioritization, and then the design process in terms of sketching, prototyping, and then finally through to development actually happens. And that's where, of course, usability testing most typically has a role to play, because that is where you can iterate your design and then iteratively test it as well. And one of the common terms used in UX design and all forms of design actually is test early, test often, and that comes that is really important when it comes to the design process too, in terms of the solution space, because even your low fidelity or sketch prototypes, they can be usability tested as well. You can perform even first click tests on those as well, just to make sure that every time you move up a layer of detail in the design, that you have validation and you have success sort of monitored before you get there, so that every time you're de-risking the design process. So whilst you might not always have the capacity to do it or the time, our message would be, where you can, make time for usability testing at every stage of your iteration of your design, because it will pay off in the long run. And then post-launch, so once you've launched your product, you shouldn't be stopping there. Usability testing should be done periodically as well. And importantly, feed the results of that back into the double diamond. So that might mean you just need to tweak something at the design stage, but you need to be humble enough to realize too, if this isn't performing, maybe we need to go back into discovery, because maybe we've solved the wrong problem, or we're solving the problem wrong. And we need to go back and discover, actually, what do we need to hone in on here, because we might not have got that right. So I'm just going to hand over now to Charlotte to take us through another couple of sections, getting into some detail now on how to go about usability testing.
Thanks, Andrew. So yeah, I suppose I would love to get spend some time just looking at the different methodologies that we would use when it comes to usability testing, because typically based on what it is you want to learn, or your budget, or maybe just the users that you're going to test with, you can choose different methods of how you actually carry out those tests. Now, the first thing that I would typically do within Fathom is sort of look at actually the type of stuff that I want to find out from the usability testing, because as Andrew said at the beginning, this form of research is first and foremost a qualitative research methodology. And the reason it is because, as Andrew pointed out, it tells us why users are behaving in a certain way. But you can still get quite good quantitative metrics from usability testing, depending on maybe the project or just your overall objective. Some of the metrics that we would typically use or try to understand within usability testing are things like success rate. So if you're giving your user a task, have they successfully completed that task, or were they unable to complete that task? Then another metric would be how long does it actually take them to complete that task? So time taken on the task. And then another quite good one is the number of clicks. So typically we would see this being used in maybe an e-commerce platform or a retailer. And what you want to see there is how many clicks is it taken from the user from the beginning of the journey right through to sort of a conversion point. And again, it just gives you a really good indication of how the user interacts with your platform. Focusing then on some of the different ways that you can carry out usability testing. The first one I wanted to focus on is moderated in person. And I think the image here sort of sums it up nicely, in that you have your study participant interacting with your interface, and then you have the moderator or the facilitator there alongside them, taking notes and maybe asking questions. Some of the reasons why we would tend to use moderated in person is that it gives you lots of face time with your users, and it really allows you to empathize with your users because you're actually seeing them interact with the interface. It also gives you a chance to get that really important contextual research. So when we say contextual research, we mean what's the environment around the user when they typically interact with the interface, or when they are looking to interact with the product. And the third one really is around observing body language. And this is really key, especially because your users may not want to appear negative. And so they may say, yeah, I really like how, this navigation is, I really like how I'm being able to move through the website. But you might be able to see that their body language tightens up. And that can be really important when we're actually analysing the results. And it feeds actually quite into some of the reasons why you maybe wouldn't choose to use moderated in person as a methodology. The first one really is around it is a little bit more costly than the other methodologies. Your moderator or facilitator has to be there. They have to sort of go to be with the study participant. You may have to book out a usability lab, or just a sort of meeting room to actually facilitate them. So there's all those little additional costs that you do have to think about when holding moderated in-person tests. And the second one is that users actually may feel intimidated to answer in a certain way. What we mean by this is, even though you may not be the sort of creator of the product or the interface, the user may assign those roles onto you, even if you maybe have maybe told them at the beginning that maybe you're an outside agency, or you're working on behalf of the client. They just may feel like they don't want to be too negative or rain on your parade, as you might say, and so sometimes that seeing that body language there can sort of allow you to read between the lines. And I just wanted to show this example of a moderated in-person usability test that we had run in a previous project around this time last year. And the main reason why we chose moderated in person was because one of the objectives of the project was to understand user sentiment to new features within the product. And so that allowed us to actually speak to the user as they were interacting with the interface, get a sense of how they would feel if they had the feature, how would they feel about interacting with it. And so it really just allowed us to improve our qualitative insights there. Another really, really great methodology for usability testing, and one that has become incredibly popular in the sort of environment that we've been in for the majority of 2020, is moderated remote. And again, the image used here, I think, sums that up quite nicely, in that you have the study participant in one location interacting with the interface or the product or service, and then you have the moderator in a different location, but still fulfilling that role of facilitator and moderator. And at Fathom, this is a methodology that we've been really relying on in the sort of COVID world, and it's something that's really helped us still maintain that powerful qualitative research methodology. So some of the reasons that we would tend to use it is that it's slightly more cost effective. You might not have to have those additional costs that I spoke about with the moderated in person. You're still seeing the user in their natural environment. And an example of this is that a project that Andrew and I worked on actually at the beginning of the year. And the project was actually trying to find out user sentiment around researching and purchasing television subscription packages. And what was great about being able to facilitate the usability testing in a remote environment is that you actually were able to have the user in their natural environment where they typically carry out that research. So in their home, often in their living room or in their dining room. And if we had decided to do that testing moderated in person, would the users have felt comfortable inviting myself and Andrea into their home? I do doubt it. And so we still do get that contextual research that is really, really important for us. And then if we just focus on maybe why we wouldn't use moderated remote usability testing, sometimes because it would interact, you would have to rely on your users interacting with digital platforms or sort of products. You are reliant on your users being that little bit more digital and mature, and dependent on the product or service that you're testing. Your users may not naturally be digitally mature, so sometimes it can sort of limit you in terms of the users that you can recruit. And I think we've all seen the sort of YouTube videos that are sort of going around in the last sort of 10 months or that of these sort of Zoom calls where we have interruptions. Luckily my husband was able to take our small dog out for a walk during this webinar, so I'm hoping not to have any interruptions for this one. But they do happen, and it's absolutely fine that they happen. But what we have seen with moderated remote testing is that it can have an impact on time and just people's concentration levels. So it's just something to bear in mind when creating your plans, really. And we actually have a very short video here of a remote moderated usability test. There are two things that I want to pick up on this test, but what I'll do is I'll play the video first, and hopefully it works okay.
Yeah, so I'm looking kind of the two little tabs here. I think maybe, I'm not looking, I'm guessing this means accommodation as well. Or actually, no, it means accommodation,
So you can see from that video that the users actually having to doubt themselves there. They're not really too sure about those icons. And what actually happens afterwards is that the facilitator has to sort of jump in and remind the user of the details of the task that they carried out. And that actually feeds us on nicely to the next methodology, which is unmoderated remote. And one of the reasons that we would typically use unmoderated remote is that, first of all, it can be very cost effective. You can sort of do it anytime, anywhere, and you can get actionable feedback within a day or two, which is great. It's very quick to implement. A lot of the platforms that we use have recruitment options built in, and then your moderator isn't needed. So again, your costs are coming down. If we look at the cons, though, suppose then users, if they do get stuck, they are on their own. So if we focus back on the video that we just looked at there, that user got a little bit stuck, and the facilitator had to jump in and remind them of the details. In an unmoderated world, your facilitator wouldn't really be there to help out. And also then again, you are reliant on users being comfortable interacting with sort of digital interfaces. And we just have a really it's just a screenshot there to show you what a user would typically see when they are going through unmoderated remote usability test. So they can see they have the tasks there, and they're able to move through the interface. So looking at the process then, and as Andrew said at the beginning of it, we could be spending all day looking at the process of actually how you set up and run and analyze a usability test. But in the interest of time, I'd love to just sort of show this image, because I think this is a really great way to see all the different stages of how you can plan, implement, conduct, and analyze usability tests. And I'll go through each stage and just sort of pull out a few little points that is always good to think about at each different stage. So the first one really is around planning the test, and things that you really should be considering when you're planning a usability test is how long you've got with each participant, because there's no point you putting pen to paper to write 15 tasks or 10 tasks or 5 tasks if you maybe only have 10, 20, 30 minutes with the participant. So it's just those little things that sometimes only really comes to you after you've done a couple of usability tests. But it is really important to think about how long have you got with each participant, and what are the key tasks that you want those participants to look at within the time. Recruitment is always quite difficult, and it actually can be more difficult or less difficult in the time of year that you're in. So for instance, now with Christmas upon us, we always find it a little bit more difficult to recruit in December, as an example. And it's always good to just have that plan B. So will you offer an incentive if you find that uptake isn't as strong as you would have liked? In terms of then preparing the materials, so again, these are little small things, but it's really, really important that it's all part of that planning process. So things like your consent form, are you going to record it? Do you need consent? If you're offering an incentive, do you need receipts? And preparing all your sort of devices, if the user is going to interact with smartphones, tablets, are they all working correctly? And again, that's setting up the environment. So if you're in person and you're going to moderate it, you need to set up the room, and all those devices, are they fully charged and they're fully working. In terms of conducting the test, it's probably one of the easiest part of the whole process. But the main thing that we would always say when we're sort of talking to researchers is the most important thing is about building rapport and making sure your user is comfortable, especially if you're doing that moderated remote usability testing. You're jumping on a video call, people potentially might not be comfortable talking to strangers, and so building in that 5-10 minute time block at the beginning to really make sure the user feels comfortable. In terms of analysing the data, this is just from my own personal experience, but if we do have quantitative metrics from the test, I always tend to focus on those first, because it just gives me a broad picture of the type of results that are going to come out of it. And then really I'm looking at the themes between the user types, maybe the device types, or maybe just certain pages within the actual interface. And reporting the results, again, going from our own experience, Andrea and I always feel that video clips and audio clips are such a great way to get buy-in from your wider teams, especially if you're reporting back to maybe those senior teams who don't get as much face time with the users as you, as maybe a UX professional or someone who is working with the interface, in a daily basis would have. So again, it's just great to sort of have that at your disposal. And then in terms of some of the softwares that we use, and I did see this come into the Q&A earlier, these are just some of the tools that we would use, and it's various different reasons. Figma is great at testing prototypes, and users can interact with it. Userfeel and Usability Hub are remote, unmoderated usability testing platforms. And Optimum Workshop is just a great overall UX research tool to use, and it does have what we would call first click testing, so looking at those number of clicks moving through a user's journey. And I suppose then sort of everyone's favorite, Zoom. I think we actually forget that if you're doing that moderated remote usability test, that just jump on it, set up a Zoom call, make sure the user's comfortable sharing their screen, and then just hold it in that sort of very, very simple. You don't have to reinvent the wheel there. And it's something actually probably Andrea and I don't care to admit how long it took us to sort of think about that back in the sort of beginning of COVID world. But yeah, it is just really important, to use the tools and the software that you have at your disposal. So I'm just going to hand back over to Andrew now, who's just going to talk us through some top tips to get us started on usability testing.
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, so this is the last little bit before we get into Q&A. So it'll only take a minute, and then I can see some questions have come in. So there's some really good ones. I can't wait to get myself and Charlotte get into those. So yeah, so this is about just what do you need to do in terms of getting your mind and your toolkit ready for getting started on usability testing, especially if this is new to you. So I guess our top 5 tips, just having lived and breathed this now for a number of years, is ensure that there's time and resources for it at the start. So when you're planning out a project, don't think about squeezing usability testing in. Make sure there's allocated time and resources in terms of who's going to do it, when they're going to do it, and what you might need to support it. Test early and often, I've already mentioned. Recruit the right people and plan well in advance of testing schedules. So Charlotte mentioned how difficult recruitment can be. So recruiting the right people can be even more difficult. So make sure that you've got a real good sense of who the people are, how you're going to get them, and some of the time involved that might be needed before you actually embark on the testing itself. focus on the devices and journeys that align with user behavior. So make sure that when you're testing, it's not at that abstract level, like I mentioned at the start. Make sure you've got the specific tasks, the specific journeys and devices that matter to users, so that when the product rolls out, it's going to be refined across the things that matter to those people. And then bring stakeholders with you in the journey. Show the results of your usability testing to your teams. Bring them in on testing to watch, perhaps, and just make sure that you're sharing the results and the reports with as many people as you can, so that you've got buy-in from across the organization, because it will make usability testing then in the future an easier one to sell if you're the one behind the initiative. So I think that's our content. We just ran a few minutes over, but we still have plenty of time to get through some questions. I noticed that a few have come in already, so we can get to that now. Charlotte, are you okay if I maybe just get started with one and maybe fire it your way?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So a couple of these have kind of been discussed, but in the webinar, but it's worth covering here. One from Pana has mentioned, what would be typically offered as an incentive?
I suppose it sometimes depends on the actual product or the interface that you're testing. And what we actually typically do in Fathom is we would try and get an understanding of the users that we're going to be reaching out, and then actually try and get an understanding of maybe what might interest them best. So if it's an e-commerce platform, that's quite simple, in that you would offer maybe like a voucher or something there to spend on the company. But it could be actually that if we know from users that maybe it's a B2B service, you could offer some services, or you could offer a draw. So I suppose it really depends on, first of all, your users and what you think would sort of pique their interest, but also how much investment from your users you're actually asking. So are you asking for half an hour? Are you asking for an hour? That would depend as well on the type of incentive. We would typically find that if we're asking for an hour, we would give some sort of like a monetary voucher, and that would be higher based on the hour. And just again, the type of information that you're asking them, is the information going to be quite sensitive, and again, so you just might need to pique the interest of the users a little bit more. So it's just those types of things that you would have to bear in mind when thinking about incentives.
Great, Charlotte, thanks. I'm going to pick one up here myself from Andrea. So Andrea's asked, what methods or software did you use for usability testing during the pandemic? Aware that not all users are familiar with the software. Did you encounter any issues with this? So yes, we have been leaning really heavily on technology to facilitate usability testing while we've been in this pandemic period for about 9 months. And not without its challenges. What we've learned over the last few months is that there are ways to mitigate some of the risk around that. So when we are recruiting and we're asking people to prep for a moderated remote session, which has been the most typical format we've been using lately, we've done a couple of things. We've asked them what their preference is in terms of a video tool, because you get over a hurdle straight away if they're more familiar with Zoom or Teams or Google Hangouts. We can adapt our method to suit their need. And then secondly, that building up rapport can be done over familiarization with how things work digitally too. So making sure there's enough time window to get 10 to 15 minutes with the individual, making sure that they feel comfortable with the screen share that is going to happen during the test, and the fact that the audio and visual is working okay. But yeah, good communications before, so that they understand that they can choose the technology, and then spending time building rapport and testing the technology before you start, because the whole point of moderated testing that is done remotely is it's a user's natural environment, and natural is not only just where they're located, but feeling natural, feeling that they're almost not being tested, to feel that relaxed. So that's one way that we've overcome that challenge. Is there anything you would want to add there, Charlotte, at all?
I mean, not really, just more sort of, really focus on that point that you said, Andrew, actually around building that rapport, because I've seen sort of some questions in the Q&A there around, the difference between sort of moderated in a lab environment and maybe, more in their natural environment. And I think, the lab environment is great because it brings down those costs, rather than maybe going out and sort of, moving around to suit the users. But really, if you're focusing on building that rapport and you're focusing on making them comfortable, you're still going to get really rich insight. So I think it's not just about, the contextual research is great, but it's looking at that natural environment. And if you don't have it, making it as natural as possible.
Great. Do you want me to pick one for you, Charlotte, or would you like to pick another one up yourself or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a great one from Daniel, actually. Sorry, I think it just, yes, around which method would you say is the best way to convince non-design stakeholders of certain design choices taken based on the testing and why? I suppose I'm really talking about my own experience here, my own preference, but I really like unmoderated remote for that. Because the reason for that is because the user is interacting with the interface completely on their own. So, now it means that you have to have very tight test plans written, but it does allow the user to have to figure things out by themselves. Also, those sessions, the platforms that we use, so the likes of Usability Hub and User Feel, they record the sessions. And the user sort of is talking is talking aloud as well. So what's great is that there's no moderator there, facilitator to maybe, point them in the right direction or to help them out if they get stuck. And so it really highlights those problem areas. And it also means that those non-design stakeholders can actually just see the user working at it by themselves. There's no one there helping them along through. So I think for me, that would be something that I would always rely on if I am speaking to those non-design stakeholders, really.
Yeah, and I would second that as well. There's nothing more powerful than seeing a user interact with something, seeing the problems, and they're kind of just on their own, and that's where of course they're going to be typically when they are using your product. So it brings people right back to the problem.
Absolutely. And something else actually that you get from an unmoderated remote session is that the user actually might have to just give up. And whilst you don't want that to happen, it's incredibly powerful when you show that to those stakeholders, because you're actually seeing the user sort of drop off the site. So if it is a big problem area, they will tend to sort of, their ears will prick up and they will begin to listen there.
Great. We'll maybe get time for maybe another 2 questions, I hope. So I'll maybe take one here that is come in from Daniel. So Daniel's asked, what would you do instead when there's no time and money to accommodate usability testing? So Daniel, yeah, good question. And I think hopefully the point I made around it being relatively quick and relatively cost effective might mitigate that answer somewhat, because you might have a different perspective on it. But having said that, if your time pressures don't allow for it, I would think about trying to make sure that you still get that behavioral qualitative insight somehow. And some of the ways that you can do that would be through maybe looking at tools like Hotjar, which can actually give you a sense of what people are doing on a particular journey or in a particular page of an interface. So you're still getting the behavior in a sense, because you're seeing where people scroll, hover, click, spend some time. And that, again, that's relatively cost effective, because you just need to plug in the code into the website. Again, the platform at its basic level is free, so that can be doing the work for you, and then you can just have a little bit of analysis time. If you don't get time to perform usability testing, short interviews can also be good, because whilst you're not testing their behavior, you're still getting time with users to actually understand their needs and what they might want out of a product. So I think a combination of maybe tools like Hotjar to get the behavior, and then some quicker qualitative insight through interviews would be a way to de-risk a project if you can't perform usability testing. Anything else to add to that, Charlotte?
No, I think you've covered everything. Yeah.
Great, because Charlotte's more on the tools than I would be in terms of usability testing. So just in case I left anything out there. I don't know, maybe get time for one more, Charlotte?
Yeah, and actually it's in the chat function, but I think it's a really good question because it's probably one of the trickiest parts of usability testing, and it's from Patrick on how do you go about finding and recruiting usability testers. And again, it sort of goes back to the whatever methodology you've actually chosen. So typically, if you're doing an unmoderated remote, which is you're relying on the software like Userfeed, they will have built-in sort of recruitment services there, so you can build out your profile within the platform, and they can actually help you recruit if you want to do that. If we're doing sort of more moderated, whether that's in person or moderated remote, I suppose we would speak to our client. That's they're the best sort of resource there in terms of looking to the right users. They could have a customer base, an engaged customer base that is worthwhile interacting with. But also, we would typically just rely on our social channels if the sort of user persona fitted the sort of wider public. Again, it sort of is all based on looking at focusing on your user and who that user is. So it's a whole sort of mix of things. But yeah, reaching out on your own networks within your own social channels, speaking to your client. So and if it's maybe that you're in house, Patrick, it's also about maybe actually forming that sort of good customer base. In previous roles when I've been in house, we've worked at actually grouping our sort of users together to form a panel that we can go back to when we were going through our iterative processes, and we would go back to those users on a regular basis, and we would sort of offer them discounts on the product. And that's actually a great way to recruit if you are in house, or even if you're not, if you're in an agency base, building that sort of panel of users that you can continuously go back to, that sort of fit a good wide sort of demographic. And then also, you can use recruitment agencies. So there are agencies out there for that will obviously up your cost a little bit because there will be a fee there. But essentially, we've used those before where we've just sent them a profile, and they have recruited. And actually, what's great about using a recruitment agency is they will they will often do a lot of the legwork for you in terms of setting up the times, making sure your consent forms are all signed as well. So they can actually take a lot of that admin work away from you as well. Andrew, I don't know if you would add anything else to that in terms of recruitment, and finding.
No, really good overview there, and as you mentioned already, Charlotte, it's such an important thing to get right. You can never think about it too early. So even when you're first thinking about usability testing, think about as early as possible how you're going to go about getting people, because you don't want to leave it too late and get either low volume or not the right quality of people coming through to test. Great. So look, I think we are pretty much out of time for the Q&A, but what I want to mention is, for those of you that left questions, and I can see there's 12 there, and some questions we didn't get the chance to get to. We produce a blog, if you aren't aware. In about a week's time, we'll publish a blog that will have a bit of a summary of the webinar, and we aim to answer these questions that have come in that we haven't had the chance to answer, as well as the ones we have. So that'll be worth checking out, no doubt, had you left a question. But we'd encourage you all to maybe check in on that. It'd be great if you could visit our blog, and there'll also be a recording of the webinar as well on our YouTube channel, which if you didn't get the chance to pay full attention to this, you'll get the chance to watch it back. And so we just have another point just to thank you all for coming. You can reach out to us as well. So Charlotte, if you can, so please stay in touch with us. So we've got, we can keep in touch through our website. You can contact any one of our team on social media as well. We have a great monthly newsletter that goes out called Immersion, where you'll get kind of insight from our team and some of our blogs and some of the things we've been up to as an agency, including details on upcoming webinars. You'll hear about those on Twitter, you'll hear about those on LinkedIn as well. And in a few days' time, we're going to be sending a survey around just to get some good, honest feedback around how you think this webinar went, how it met your needs or not, because we always value that feedback and want to improve through good old-fashioned design iteration. And our webinars are no different. So from myself and Charlotte, thanks very much for coming along today, and yeah, all the best.
Thanks, folks.
Bye now.